Hello everybody, what a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for your very kind invitation. I, ladies and gentlemen, have been travelling to and around Ireland since before any of you were born. 1973, I first hitchhiked here. I had heard that in Corry, well, they had for a start the most beautiful women in the world, which is evidently true. And furthermore, if you arrived at the right time in August, you could go to Killarney, where the Puck Fair was taking place, and the pubs were open till October. So, and all of that proved absolutely correct. And I've been coming back many, many times since then. And I must say it's been getting rather easier thanks to aviation. Instead of hitchhiking here, I left my house just after 6 o'clock this morning to be here, and very straightforward it was too. I now travel to Ireland many times a year, most recently for, of course, the opening of Centre Parks, a marvellous opportunity. So just before I talk about Brexit, I need to give you a declaration of interest, which is I am absolutely voted Remain, and I did all I could to persuade people within the travel realm that from a tourism point of view, Brexit is very, very destructive. Now, I'm going to be telling you, I hope, what the political state of play is, who's responsible for it, what happens now. I'm going to say what the short-term and the long-term effects of Brexit are going to be, and also to talk about what you can do right now to make sure that the long-term impact on the island of Ireland is actually favourable, which I will get to eventually. Please stay with me for the journey. I strongly believe that anything which separates us is actually philosophically bad. It damages humanity, increases the chances of conflict, and I think we're going to get eventually the realisation that this is the 21st century's greatest ever example of be careful what you wish for. There was, of course, a vote in favour of leaving the European Union, egged on by some politicians who, I think, when actually we find out what Brexit is like, it will be a lasting shame on them. So, oh my goodness me, how did we get here? Well, there he is, David Cameron, who thought, well, we've actually got a bit of a problem involving Nigel Farage. He's taking our votes. I also have the enduring problem of the right wing of the Conservative Party, which is causing me problems, as it has done for decades. They simply despise Europe. And so let's just have a referendum, just as in 1975 when we first tried it. I know that the Irish are no strangers to EU referenda yourself. But when we tried it, it was 2-1 in favour, and we didn't have to have a re-vote. Thank you very much. So we had this very, very straightforward vote. A binary question about an extraordinarily nuanced issue, and since then, of course, it's divided the UK and will, I suspect, lead to its breakup in due course. I remember the day before the referendum, Michael O'Leary very kindly came over to lend his support. Of course, one of the many aspects of travel that is disrupted by Brexit is air travel, and that worked very well, obviously. Yeah, and we had the immediate short-term impact. Now, partly it came about because Jeremy Corbyn, who strangely became leader of the Labour Party, distrusts and I suspect despises Europe, and therefore was simply not at the in any part of the campaign to remain in the UK, in the EU, and we then had. I think, well, I mean, we're going through quite a succession of worst prime ministers in history at the moment. If you'd like any of them, you're very welcome to them. But Theresa May, who made things even worse because very simply, she drew red lines tied up with her personal feelings about immigration, which she is very, very much against, and therefore everything became irreconcilable. So we've now got Boris Johnson, whose sole aim in life is to be Prime Minister. Absolutely. He is actually a liberal conservative. He did perfectly all right as a very liberal mayor of London. However, he realised when David Cameron made the mistake of having an election that his best hope of becoming leader of the Conservatives was to campaign to leave on the assumption that the vote would be to remain. He would then be the darling of the right wing of the Conservative Party and be elected after David Cameron. Well, he got to be Prime Minister, but not by the usual means. And with his style of premiership, we have the ludicrous situation where lies, threats, insults are the political norm in Britain. It is desperately upsetting for everyone. A sense of hopelessness, I think, which is kind of spreading across the land. However, even though I am a Remainer, I think we will end up leaving. I will explain why. Well, partly, and this is, of course, Boris Johnson on his great trip around Europe, where he was empty podiumed by the Luxembourg Prime Minister. But Theresa Villiers, Northern Ireland Secretary, very, very avid pro-Brexit campaigner. Now, if anybody was going to know, to understand, to predict, to work on, to manage what would happen to the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic after Brexit, obviously she would know because she was campaigning to leave. I think, like Boris Johnson, she wasn't expecting to win, and then this is what she wrote the day afterwards. We must now try to bridge divisions by listening to both Leave and Remain voters. Of course, that never happened. The period of informal negotiation prior to an Article 50 process was crucial and should not be rushed. It was. And I'm particularly conscious of the need to do that in Northern Ireland, where a majority voted Remain. Well, not if Theresa May's majority depends on the DUP. So, an absolute mess. And by comparison, I must say, whatever you think, personally, of Irish politics, if by the time you finish with or voted out Leo Varadkar and Simon Connolly, please send them over, we need them. So, what is going to happen? You might have noticed that there's an extraordinarily bad-tempered general election going on at the moment. Oh, there we are. But we have been told, of course, that we were going to leave. We didn't, and that happened on 3 times. Sometimes people forget that there was a date in April when we were also going to leave. I think we have to assume, given that the Labour Party opposition has decided not to be either a party or an opposition, that the Conservatives will win the most seats and probably get an overall majority. Although that may once again depend on the DUP. If that is the case, then his so-called oven-ready withdrawal agreement will go ahead, and when people will wake up to yet another Boris Johnson lie, which is that when he said, get Brexit done, what he actually meant was, get Brexit started, because passing withdrawal agreement is merely the overture to the many years of negotiation about what happens on the path to long-term leaving the EU. We will also be on the path to long-term economic decline, certainly relative to where the UK would have been, and quite possibly in absolute terms as well. We find out on, I think, next Tuesday whether the UK is now officially in recession, and that's without having left. The economy will, the pound will weaken along with the economy, and actually with the loss of the benefits of the Open Skies Agreement, which of course Ryanair has done so splendidly to exploit, air links to and from the UK will reduce. A lot of the European Union workers who are currently helping the UK tourism industry to thrive, relatively speaking, will leave, and a number of those may come to Ireland as a good, civilised, English-speaking place where they would like to work. It will, by the way, also take away a substantial number of British, a substantial number of kind of hidden tourists, because of course, if in the UK you have several million workers from the EU, their families will come and visit them and they will become tourists. Those will reduce. There is, from the election, another plausible outcome, which is Labour winning fewer seats than the Conservatives, but you then get an anti-Tory government shored up by the Liberal Democrats, the Scottish Nationalists, and the many independents who will be elected, many of them after having been kicked out of the Conservative Party. If that happens, you can expect Jeremy Corbyn not actually to be around for very long, because all the other parties will say, we're not going for a coalition with you lot if he's in charge. There will be, this by the way was what Ryanair was saying to its shareholders before the last, a bit before the original date to leave. But looking ahead at what it will mean for Ireland, let's start by looking at short-term effects for tourism from the UK. Now, of course, the UK in particular, England is the key source market for Ireland. British visits abroad will reduce. Now, partly that's because of the economic self-harm that we'll be committing, reducing disposable income, but it will also be because there will be a slump in sterling once again. And crucially, widespread confusion over what the heck awaits British travellers, and that is partly because we had this Get Ready for Brexit campaign, over €100 million spent on something which actually wasn't going to happen. But, for example, people do not understand whether what the rules will be on mobile phones abroad, and that's because nobody knows. They have absolutely no idea what is happening with passports, because we've all been told that actually your passport could well not be valid. They do sort of realise that we'll be put in the wrong queue when we go to Spain and France and Greece and so on. But they don't understand that from 2021, in order to go to continental Europe, we will need an online visa like the American ESTA. It's called the ETIAS. Of course, anybody with the good sense to have Irish ancestry and an Irish passport will not need to go through that. We most certainly will, and that has absolutely nothing to do with Brexit. It was in motion in 2016 before the referendum. It just wasn't talked about very much. There's all kinds of concerns about passports, as I say, and crucially, again, more self-harm for the inbound tourism industry. This is a leaked Home Office document just saying how everyone coming from the EU to Europe, to the UK, will need an identity card. Now, that might sound, we'll need a passport, not an identity card. Now, that might sound irrelevant. It most certainly is not for the, I calculate, 150 million people in the European Union who have ID cards provided free by their governments but do not have passports, because why would they, frankly? They can go to anywhere in the EU and a whole lot of other countries besides. So Turkey, many of them, assorted Balkan countries, even the lovely Republic of Georgia, all without a passport. And the UK will be saying, right, you want to come here? You've got to go and queue up and spend €100 or whatever it costs to get a passport to come here. It's already damaging the inbound schools market to the UK because they simply do not understand it. We will, the good news is, be getting passports which are exactly the same shade of blue as North Korea. So I think, on balance, most British people would say, yes, it's worth it. People don't understand about driving licences. Quite right too. There are 3 different kinds of international driving permits that we might need to have to drive in continental Europe, and this is what we are planning in Kent for when everything goes horribly wrong and the customs checks come back into force. And of course, European health insurance card will no longer be valid. And rather like the fact that so many of the people who, having talked to them, and I think it's really important that we talk to people who voted whatever they voted, having talked to a lot of people who voted leave, they voted leave because they've been told, yeah, nothing will happen. You'll still be able to go to Spain for 4 months every winter. You'll still be able to get free healthcare when you're there, so you don't need to worry about insurance. All of which, of course, is a complete lie. But there we are. It's too late now. And yeah, sterling will. I remember those wonderful days when you could get about €1.50 for your pound. Those have long gone. There'll be other effects such as High Speed 2, which is a really important rail project in the UK. That will be scrapped because we won't be able to afford it. So there are, though, many benefits. Oh, and by the way, Heathrow won't get a third runway because, again, that's a very easy thing to cancel. And the benefits for Ireland start flowing immediately because Dublin, of course, by then will probably have a second runway. And it is poised very much to become the entry point for Europe from North America, certainly in competition, I think, against Heathrow, which will not expand, along with so much else that won't expand. Yeah, long-term recession will happen, and there we are, the Scotsman warning that economic growth will be wiped out. It goes deeper than that, of course. You might have seen this. The UK, after we failed to leave twice in the spring, then had to elect MEPs, and they decided the best way they could express their view of Europe was to turn their backs on the European Parliament. That is most definitely having an impact on people from elsewhere in Ireland, elsewhere in the EU, who might want to come to the UK. Now, this is of course crucial because you have a lot of people who come here, particularly from the Netherlands, from Germany, through the UK. And if they're worried, what do we need to do about motor insurance, driving licences? Why do the British hate everybody who happens to come from Europe? Those people will be deterred. And therefore, that will have an impact. However, I think that will be offset for Ireland by an increase in travellers who choose Ireland in preference to the UK because they are coming from abroad and they can see that it's a more appealing place to be, and the British who will simply be coming to Ireland because it's close, they speak English. We are the worst linguists in Europe. Well, I think to be fair, probably the worst linguists in the world, because we assume everybody will speak English. We won't have very much money, certainly from the when I was 1973, Ireland was about the only hope for an overseas holiday for people in southwest Scotland, in North Wales, in northwest England and so on. That will return to some extent. Now, while all this is happening, there are actually, although the UK media don't seem to have noticed, there are other things happening in the world. Just to remind you, this is the little risk register interlude. There will be a pandemic. It won't be Ebola, but there will be stuff that happens which will diminish tourism worldwide. Here we have 3 possibilities: smallpox re-emergence, spike in malaria in Africa, rabies in Mozambique. Worst of all, surf resort closed down by brain-eating amoeba. There we are. So there will be stuff happening, I'm afraid, like that. Security issues will be taking place, and all kinds of other things which will disturb temporarily, we hope, travel. Anybody here get caught up in the Gatwick Airport closure? Oh my goodness me, last December, just awful. Many flight cancellations. We've had data breaches. We'll get more of those. And of course, I know that this afternoon we are going to be hearing from Professor John Sweeney and Sarah Dempsey about sustainability and climate change. That is going to have an impact as well. And don't forget about volcanoes. Who would have thought we'd all be able to say, Eya, fiat yon yoko, after that volcanic explosion that we suffered, which closed down all aviation in Europe for a week. Anyway, there will be more of those. I was actually on holiday pretending to work in Norway at the time it happened, and you didn't need to speak great Norwegian to know that things weren't going particularly well. I flew out as a passenger on SAS. I came back as freight on a container ship. And the next one to go, ladies and gentlemen, will be, well, where's this? Go on, first one to shout out.
Naples.
Naples, and what's the threatening looking thing in the background? Vesuvius, yes, very good, very good. So all that's going on. But meanwhile, let's have a look at the long-term impacts in the minutes remaining to me. So the UK will sort out its politics by the time it becomes clear the mistruths, the lies, the mismanagement that surrounds Brexit. We will end up with a deal which is far, far worse than we have now. We will still be subjugated to the European Court of Justice in many places, and certainly starting with Scotland, possibly Wales, and then England, will be saying, Northern Ireland's got such a great deal, can we have that too, please? So we will come back. Politicians who are wisely keeping out of it, like David Miliband, who should have been the Labour Party leader at the moment, and Ruth Davidson from the Scottish Conservatives will come back and in from the cold. It's going to take a generation before the divisions are healed. I see the prospects for Ireland as very, very encouraging, because tourists from outside Europe will always seek a friendly, welcoming, English-speaking, cultured, accessible place to arrive, and the UK seems to be relinquishing that, so Ireland will naturally capitalise on it, although there will be some competition from Scotland, which I imagine certainly by 2030 will no longer be in the UK. And you will also see that there is a change in the way that people reach Ireland. So, for example, you will be wanting to target the Bypass Britain Brigade, using the links from France and indeed Spain into Ireland. You'll want to emphasise Ireland's direct air links, well, with the world, but in particular with Europe. The fact that the two leading airline executives in Europe both are Irish, Willie Walsh of IAG, Aer Lingus' parent company, of course, and Michael O'Leary of Ryanair, who I think is on my boarding pass today, dressed up as Santa. Certainly, thank you very much, Michael. It cost €20 arriving, and it's costing you 17 to depart. So those are going to do Ryanair a great deal of good. But seriously, the air links that Ireland enjoys are absolutely magnificent, and they will continue to expand as the UK declines. Be nice to us Remainers. We're feeling very, very unloved, and a campaign which says basically visit your nearest and dearest international neighbour, I think will pay off for the many, many people like me who go on the marches, and it does absolutely no good whatsoever.
It's only 2 minutes.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm watching the clock down here. Less than 2 minutes. You'll be delighted to learn. So, of course, beach tourism is something which the UK simply does not have anything. Simply doesn't appreciate what Ireland has to offer, which is good. And of course, we were hearing about the fantastic food and drink, which I can absolutely confirm has improved hugely since 1973, although I still like the pub in Sneem, where I managed to get 3 pints of Guinness for 50 pence as it was then, and I still don't know about that long division. Of course, Ireland is going to continue to be Europe's window on the world, to welcome everybody, regardless of where they come from, how they vote, and so on. Feed them wonderfully well, as we've been hearing, and entertain them and enlighten them. And so Ireland will prosper, and I'm hugely enthused at the prospect of coming to Ireland, because frankly nowhere else will have me. But I'm also enthused at talking to as many of you as I possibly can over lunch. Thank you so much for your time.
Podium.
I'll stay here, yes.
Because we're maybe you'd rather have a
okay.
Code.
Fantastic. Is this karaoke now?
Yeah, well, at any moment you can break out into Rule Britannia. We won't object. We're just going to ask for a few questions from our audience, and I see a hand up there. Yes, yourself.
John McGrillen from Tourism Northern Ireland. So, Simon, just your reflections are on, I suppose, the implications for the Republic of Ireland as a tourism destination. Where do you see those sit for Northern Ireland, given where it sits?
Oh, it's going to be overwhelmingly positive. I was forgive me, I'm short of time, so I was editing, but yeah, basically it's terrific, and it might finally, actually, one of the unexpected benefits could be that the British, who simply do not regard Northern Ireland as a potential tourist destination, will suddenly think, hang on, we want to go somewhere where our pound is worth £1, and that'll be Gibraltar or Belfast. And so, yes, of course, it's going to be hugely beneficial, and of course, with the pound's decline against the euro, Northern Ireland will hardly be able to move from people from the Republic, and indeed elsewhere in Europe, coming in to enjoy the low cost of being on holiday. I mean, in terms of things which need to be done right now, there are two of them. The first one is to emphasise to markets outside Europe, and that will be particularly North America, but of course Asia as well, the fact that none of this applies to Ireland, and so therefore people can, well, as I was saying, it will become the natural arrival point for an awful lot of people, because you want somewhere which is a springboard to continental Europe. The UK is giving up that role, and so therefore it is going to be marvellous. But the other thing which also needs to be emphasised at the same time, and it might be, and this is not intended at all disparagingly, but it might be for Americans slightly tricky to understand. Certainly the British need to be constantly educated about it, and I'm doing all I can. The common travel area, which of course predates the EU by half a century, and means that there is complete ease of movement. And I spend quite a lot of time trying to emphasise to the British, I'm saying all this stuff about driving licences and e-hit cards and passports and everything else, but it does not apply to Ireland. And I think that's something which Tourism Ireland certainly needs to be doing.
So isn't that actually very important, Simon, in terms of, you know, your average British traveller suddenly realising, I could go across to Ireland. There's no hassle, there's no bother. The common travel area would actually work to our advantage.
Oh, most certainly. It is, yeah. Brexit, for all its the appallingness that's going on, and certainly from a philosophical, from a point of view of humanity, it's just extremely ugly. But actually, it's going to be positive for Ireland, because, yes, it will be the one place in Europe you can go where you don't need to worry about all these things. And it's just having had this barrage of propaganda which the British taxpayer has paid for about how awful and difficult it's going to be to go to the EU, there needs to be that asterisk which always says, actually, this doesn't apply to the Republic of Ireland.
You can come here.
Earlier about the Get Ready for Brexit initiatives which the government is taking. I think what you've said is they've got to be absolutely blanketing our markets to make sure that the confusion that's out there can be stripped away.
Well, look, it's a question of just I mean, the whole Brexit campaign, like so much which has happened since Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, is not actually anything to do with educating the British. It was actually full of lies and fibs and mistruths and half-truths. It was entirely intended to, when Brexit didn't happen, create the impression that it was all Parliament's fault, and therefore what they were saying was kind of was almost irrelevant. So having sowed all this confusion, which they did for purely party political reasons, it now needs to be unpicked. But that's just going to be a long, relentless slog of telling the British actually it's going to be quite easy. All that stuff about continental Europe, forget that. Just go to the Republic.
Anybody else want to? Yes.
And I'm very sorry about your lunches, everybody. I can't speak personally after that.
Owen Amara Walsh from the Irish Tourism Industry Confederation. Thanks so much for that, Simon. I thought it was very witty and insightful. And I suppose it is worth stating that it's, and I think you said it in your slides, it's the end of the beginning rather than the beginning of the end, because if a Brexit withdrawal agreement comes to pass on January 31st, after that there's the hard slog of the trading relationship between the UK and the EU. And I think, personally, I think that the Irish government has done a pretty good job in over the last 2 years securing Ireland's interests as well as possible in the withdrawal agreement. But even after the withdrawal agreement, if it's passed, after that, the Irish are going to really have to be on our toes, because we don't want a UK that is a kind of a regulation-free Singapore style a neighbour. I always think of state aid as a classic example. And you wouldn't want the UK, free of EU sort of state aid restrictions, suddenly being allowed to write cheques to the likes of Ryanair, for example, to fly into Manchester rather than Kerry.
Right.
So there's work to be done. I mean, it's not going away anytime soon.
Oh, look, I absolutely understand your concerns on those particular issues. Yes, of course, it's great to talk about London being the Singapore of Europe. It's never ever going to happen, because in those very long, onerous negotiations, which are just beginning, the UK is going to have to cave in, as it will be deployed depicted in the right-wing media, on pretty much everything in order to maintain things such as open skies, really important for the UK. And in order to get that, you just have to fit in with Europe. So we will get something which is being, it's going to be kind of Norway minus, probably. At the moment, I would say we're probably Germany plus. But that's what we will be going for. But certainly, I must say, whatever you think of your politicians, I think the Taoiseach has played an absolute blinder. He's got the European Union completely on Ireland's side. You could probably ask foreign ministers for all the 27 countries, just describe the backstop, and they wouldn't be able to, but they know that if Leo Varadkar wants it, then it must be delivered. So there is a great show of unity, and well, hats off to Ireland and the rest of the EU for playing, for keeping together when we've been falling apart.
Be careful, Simon. He might hire you yet. He's in danger of hiring you. Is there anybody else who would like to make a point? Yes,
my name is Tom Randall from Randallstown in Killarney. Would you ever see the British government reducing your quite high VAT rate that might start to compete with ours? 20% right now, I believe.
20%, no, that won't happen because in the current election campaign that you're lucky enough not to be going through, there are ludicrous spending promises being made which can only be made up by tax receipts, since they will decline, for example, from air passenger duty. They have to be made up sometime. No, we will see an increase in taxes, because increasingly, as local authorities become under pressure, they will simply start having their own local taxes, which they're now legally allowed to do. So don't worry, Ireland will still remain relatively excellent value, especially hotels in Killarney and every other town.
Is there anybody else wants to come in here? Okay. It's just listening to you, Simon, though, the fact is that our message is going to have to be a bit mixed. As somebody who's old enough to have been delighted to see the relationship between Britain and Ireland improve, particularly as part of the European Union, the wonderful thing was that we were able to express our identity in a positive way. We weren't just saying we're not Britain, which went on for a very long time. We were now both members of the European Union,
Yes.
and we were able to be positive about the way we expressed ourselves. But in a funny way, except perhaps for the British market itself, part of our selling point will be trying to say to the rest of the world, we're not Britain, we're not Britain, we're not Britain. And there's a slight part of me that's really, really sad, that's what we're going to have to do.
Anything that spreads division and distrust is terrible, but Ireland has been put in this position through absolutely no fault of its own, and therefore, if Britain, Britain needs to sort it out. Meanwhile, Ireland does need to say, yes, we are your welcoming introduction to Europe, and from here you can fly to 20 European Union countries, no problems, no issues whatsoever. Or indeed, you could just scoot across on the ferry to Britain, where they do things slightly strangely, but they're all right, really. And of course, everyone here is extremely welcome in Britain, but I must say, if you've been put off, I really don't blame you.
Well, Simon, thank you. That was a wonderfully optimistic, in as far as one can look at the future, and we're all really grateful to you. So we give him a big hand.